Then another thing I need to mention when we are talking about compression, it's the subject of parallel compression or New York compression. New York compression or parallel compression simply means that you send the signal to a separate bus where you compress the signal heavily and then just feed it a little bit to the original signal. You can also use a wet and dry knob to simulate this. Let's see, I think the H comp from Waves, for example, here's a wet and dry mix. And parallel compression works very well on drums. You can use it to bring up, let's say, mud or sound from the room and reverb sounds in a nice way. And I'm going to show you how you would set it up to a compressor to use parallel compression on drums. What you're going to want, you want to destroy all transients. So this means attack time is pretty fast. Release time is, I don't know, also fast, not too fast, because then it's pumping too much, to my opinion. Let's have a listen. Okay, that's how you set it up. You set it up pretty crazy, and then you just dial in the compressor a little bit. Maybe like 20%. Now let's see what it does. Okay, it's very subtle on my headphones at the moment. What it does is it makes it more present without destroying transients, because it's just 80% it's the original signal and just 20% the squashed compressed signal. And I use this technique only on drums. Sometimes I use it on my lead group. I use this effect most of the time only on my drum group. Sometimes I use it on my lead group. You can also experiment with an equalizer after the compressor, where you send the signal to a second bus, then compress it heavily, and after the compression you apply a high shelf where you make a boost in the high frequency, and then just add this group a little bit to the mix. Then another thing we have with compressors are multiband compressors. Personally, I don't use multiband compression much in the mixing stage, because if I need multiband compressor in 80% of the time, there's something wrong with the source. But anyway, I want to show you a few multiband compressors and gonna explain you where you're gonna use them. First of all, there is multiband compressors and dynamic EQs. It's basically the same, with the difference that in dynamic EQ you can adjust the band in a much more detailed way, because you can use it like an equalizer, because it is an equalizer. And with multiband compressors you just have certain bands which are wider. And how do we use multiband compressors in the mixing stage? Like, personally, I don't use them in the mixing stage. I don't need it. I use them in the mastering stage. And personally, I would use them only to address a certain frequency range. Like in everything in mixing, I think if you need to do drastic moves with your equalizer, with your compressor, I think there will be something wrong with the source. Most of the time, everything is just gentle and moderate EQing, a little bit of low mids out, a little bit of high shelf in, something like this, a little bit of compression, just 1 or 2 dB gain reduction, and that's it. But anyway, I'm going to show you what a multiband compressor does and where you could use it, for example. Here we have a multiband compressor and we have the different bands. And in the mixing stage where I can imagine where it's good to use a multiband compressor, for example, on a bass line, where I would just, let's just apply the multiband compressor to the bassline group. For example, we can use the multiband compressor to control the low end on a bass line, for example. I have never used it, to be honest, because I would address the issue on the individual track by equalization and compression. But, you know, everybody's different. Try out if it works for you. For example, here on the bass line, we can just switch, we can just use this band here. And then on low frequencies, it's recommended if you use slower attack and release times, something like 30 milliseconds and 100 milliseconds release. And then you can just compress the low end a little bit, bring up a little bit of gain. And you have a little bit more pressure now in the low end. You hear the low end is now, it's more pumping, it's more aggressive. And that's, for example, a technique I could imagine, which is nice to use. Or, for example, if you have drums where you have a certain band which is a little bit harsh, for example, in the 4 to in this area maybe. Let's have a listen. In this area, you can try to compress it a little bit. On drums, I would use it like a de-esser, which means all the harsh sounds in this frequency spectrum are reduced. I use pretty fast attack and release times because you do not want to get the transients through. So I think this should work right. Maybe 30 milliseconds can be nice. Then bring up the gain. Okay, let's see what it does. I also want to use it on the very high frequencies. Okay, let's see what it does. Okay, what you can hear clearly that it makes the high end more smooth. It appears nicer to the ear. It's much more smooth to the ear. But you can also hear that the transients are killed a little bit, especially for the hi-hats, the tick, tick, tick sound, which is now it's not there anymore. And another thing where I could imagine it can be nice to use multiband compression, for example, can be on lead sounds where, for example, the low mids are out of control. I would use it maybe just one band and set it up as high as possible. Let's just use the second band here. And for this purpose, I would use medium attack, something 60 milliseconds could be nice, 10 to 20 milliseconds, maybe 50 milliseconds of release can be nice. And then let's see what we can do. Okay. Okay, what you can hear, it's a subtle thing in this case, but you hear that in the low mids they are more under control. Nothing is popping out so much anymore, and yeah, that's how I would use a multiband compressor in the mixing stage. Personally, I never used it with all bands active. I don't know, I never used it. I always use it to address certain individual bands. And in this case, I also want to mention a dynamic EQ. It's the TDR Nova. It's a freeware. There's also a paid version, but it's a very great sounding dynamic EQ, which I also use in my mastering process. And it's basically the same concept, only that you can use it as an equalizer. Here you can activate a threshold on one band, and then you can change the cue size, which is pretty nice. You can also solo the band which it is working, and you can assign attack and release times. So it's a pretty useful tool.